Do you remember the days when all e.l.f. beauty products were $1? Well, now they sit at an average retail price of $9 and are considered the #1 brand amongst Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And while most beauty brands are currently struggling, e.l.f. actually just reached their 23rd quarter of consecutive growth. And they have seen such sustained success in beauty that now they're actively working towards expanding beyond the beauty segment to become a full-fledged media company. Yes, media. So how did e.l.f., kind of this underdog at the drugstore that was really struggling even a few years back, surpass so many of its legacy competitors? It's actually a bit of an unexpected story, and I'm excited to dive into the weird world of e.l.f. today. Okay, so you know me and you know it's going to be a full face of e.l.f. to fit in with the theme of this video. So that was the Halo Glow. The shade I have, as you saw, is not my perfect shade. It is the shade 2. It's a little bit too dark for me. But now we're gonna go in with their newest foundation that I actually don't like very much, but you know, for the theme of the video, this is the Soft Glam Satin Foundation. Okay, first things first, I will be using e.l.f. Beauty and e.l.f. Cosmetics throughout this video. They are the same thing, but they're also not, and we will get into that later in the video, but just don't be confused if you hear me using both. We're going all the way back to 2004. e.l.f. was started by beauty industry veteran Scott Vincent Borba and recent NYU grad at the time, Joseph Shama, with quite a bit of help from Joseph's dad, Alan Shama. So here's a little bit about both co-founders. Okay, Joseph, as I said, was 23 years old at the time that they started e.l.f., a recent graduate of NYU, and at the time he was working at his father's apparel business. And Joseph wasn't really that into cosmetics, and by that into, he was not into cosmetics at all. He had no interest in beauty, but he saw a gap in the market that he thought he could fill for inexpensive beauty products. Scott Vincent Borba was 31 at the time. The two had met at a party prior, and Scott Vincent Borba was pretty experienced in beauty. He worked previously at Neutrogena, Mura, and Shiseido, like many more, as well as a celebrity esthetician in LA. A 2009 Vogue piece says there is a 6-month wait for one of Scott Vincent Borba's high-definition hybrid diamond peel facials in Los Angeles. And the story goes that the idea for the brand came from the two of them when they saw women driving luxury cars like Mercedes or BMW, but still wearing like bargain price makeup products. So in 2004, e.l.f. was born, and they really were not expecting much. In an interview I watched from Alan Shama, which is Joseph's father, he said, "We hit a lot of roadblocks and it didn't look like it was ever going to become anything." And okay, going a little bit out of order here, but I want to get you caught up because, spoiler alert, they do both exit the company later, but I wanted to tell you where those two are today. So where is Joseph Shama today? Well, he and his father, Alan, founded AS Beauty in 2019. And you might be thinking, I'm not familiar with that. But when I tell you the brands that AS has acquired and has under their umbrella, I think you will definitely recognize them, okay? Laura Geller, Cover FX, Bliss, Julep, and Mally. So that is where Joseph Shama is focused today. As for Scott Vincent Borba, he went on to create his own beauty brand and also some food products that were supposed to be infused with different vitamins that were supposed to help your skin from the inside out. He has also published 3 books, but today, he is now a seminarian preparing for the priesthood in the Diocese of Fresno in California. Yes, he is working to become a priest. But again, back to the e.l.f. timeline. As I said, the brand was started in 2004 with their $1 beauty products. And subsequently, they came out with their $1 brushes. If you remember these, I remember having an entire collection of the e.l.f. $1 brushes when I first started getting into makeup, and it was all I could afford. And in the beginning, they weren't available in very many retailers. It was really hard to get your hands on e.l.f., and Glamour magazine wanted to include e.l.f. in an article, but they told e.l.f., we can't include this if our readers can't shop this product nationally. So the team scrambled and they were like, okay, well, are we gonna be able to get the product into stores nationally overnight? Probably not. Let's focus on e-commerce, which again, this is the early 2000s. This was not widely adopted yet. Not a lot of companies were utilizing e-commerce to sell to shoppers. And that was their main selling channel until they entered Target in 2007. And this was very significant for e.l.f. So this was probably partially influenced by Alan Shama's relationship with Target prior to this. Again, remember that's Joseph's dad. he had an apparel company. So they already had some connections with Target there. Now, a podcast interview I was watching from Alan Chama, he noted that it wasn't necessarily the relationship that he had with Target that made launching there easier, but it was more so that he knew what he was doing to navigate that process. And flash forward to today for just a second here, e.l.f. is Target's #1 biggest brand across mass color, so like drugstore makeup, by a pretty wide margin according to e.l.f. CEO. Anyways, back to the timeline. In following years, e.l.f. continued to grow. We watched them launch their studio collection that was full of the $3 products. So then, we saw the range of the $1 very affordable products to their more almost like luxury line within e.l.f. I'm using luxury loosely, but they started offering $3 products that were a higher quality, a higher level of packaging. And if you remember, a lot of these products in the $3 studio line kind of resembled NARS products. There was definitely some duping happening even from the early days of e.l.f. And what was really wonderful for e.l.f. was that they didn't really need to do any advertising. The products were kind of advertising themselves because they were so inexpensive. So they were getting a lot of traction simply from word of mouth. They were also getting a lot of press in beauty magazines, which were almost like the social media of that time. I mean, beauty magazines still exist today, but maybe not as prominent as they did back then. This is where consumers were seeking out reviews and recommendations. So it's also around the time they started working with their first private equity partner that was able to invest more money into the brand to then grow even more, up until, fun fact, e.l.f. was almost acquired by L'Oreal. Joseph Shama said in an interview that they had gone through everything. The deal was like fully finalized basically. And then in the very last minute, L'Oreal pulled out. They were devastated. They're like, okay, what now? But instead, shortly after that, they actually were acquired by TPG Growth. They purchased a majority stake. This is another private equity firm. This same year, 2014, was also when Tarang Amin was named CEO of e.l.f. He is still the CEO today. And about a year and a half-ish after that acquisition was when the founders exited. Now, I will say in terms of TPG management, they have since exited. And in 2016, e.l.f. went public. And at the time, they were valued at $1.8 billion. So that was a very quick and brief run through of some of the early timeline of e.l.f. So we can move into some more recent things going on with the brand. Okay, so I want to start with e.l.f. the Disruptor. So in all of the interviews that I watched, regardless of the age of these interviews, some of the more recent ones, some of the older ones, whether they were from the original founders or the current CEO, there was one word that was repeated over and over and over, and that was the word disrupt or disruptor, disrupting. The way the original founders spoke about their vision for e.l.f. was being a disruptor in the industry. They saw a gap and they wanted to fill it. And even today, what they call themselves, and you see this a lot in their press, they say that they are a bold disruptor with a kind heart. So what do they mean by disrupting? Obviously the original vision for this was in the price when the brand was started in 2004. They're one of the most inexpensive makeup brands available. And still today, they're certainly not the least expensive brand at the drugstore, but they're definitely offering a high quality product at a reasonable price. But part of this disruption today, of course, is about their dupe strategy, which we are going to talk extensively about in this video. But not only do they consider themselves a disruptor through that price, but they're also being pretty disruptive in some of their other ventures outside of beauty, which again, stay tuned, we will get to. But let's start with the price. So as we know, e.l.f. started with $1 products. And as I said, in the beginning, they really weren't utilizing much traditional advertising, but even today, they don't really pay many influencers to do sponsorships for them. This is something the CEO noted over and over in interviews, that most of the content created about e.l.f. is organic. And a recent report from DCXD ranked e.l.f. as the #6 brand in terms of engagement in UGC. So basically the 6th most popular brand that people are making videos about without being paid to make videos about them, or just talk about them on the internet in general. And the main demographic e.l.f. is focused on is Gen Z, but increasingly Gen Alpha as well. And what Tarang Amin said in an interview that I found really interesting was that because they're focusing their efforts on teens and tweens, these teens and tweens are then telling their moms, their aunts, their grandmothers about e.l.f. products. And that's where some of these older generations are learning about e.l.f. Even if their efforts in terms of advertising aren't focused on some of these older generations, the messaging is still getting to them through organic recommendations from their children. You know, he was saying that the mom would then try the child's e.l.f. product and think, wait, this is just as good as the prestige one that I've been using. And again, this all comes back into a lot of organic conversation and growth that e.l.f. has seen without necessarily having to lean as heavily into paid promotions. Though they have more recently, and we will get there. But again, I think this falls back into the idea of e.l.f. being a bit of a disruptor. You know, you think of some more of these legacy brands, the more traditional way that they would advertise throughout the years was on television, on a billboard, in a magazine with a paid advertisement. Well, e.l.f. didn't really take that same approach. Also, under the idea of e.l.f. being disruptive, obviously we have to talk about their dupe strategy. This has been a really core part of the e.l.f. identity, especially in recent years, is that they're known as a dupe brand these days. And I watched and read about 1 million interviews from Tarang Amin, the CEO of e.l.f., and he mentions dupes in pretty much all of them, often ties back a lot of e.l.f.'s current success to their strategy of capitalizing on inexpensive versions of popular prestige items. And it's interesting too, he's not being super overt in these interviews and saying, yeah, you know, we're doing really well because we dupe everyone. e.l.f. likes to use language like democratize beauty. You know, that was a phrase I heard them say often in a lot of this press, was that we want to democratize beauty, make it accessible to everyone, which means make dupes. Amin told Yahoo Finance, we have this unique ability to take inspiration from our community or the best of prestige and be able to introduce them at extraordinary values. He also said, we sell 9 times the number of units as their prestige counterparts because we can give access to millions of customers. Dupes are a huge part of their strategy here, okay? And e.l.f. listens to their community. They're making the products that people are asking for. Tarang Amin shared a story when he was on a TikTok live and people kept leaving comments saying, you know, we want to dupe for the Drunk Elephant bronzer drops. And he said immediately after that, he got back to his team and was like, okay, well, where is that in the pipeline? How do we get these e.l.f. bronzer drops to market? And when you look at 2 of the best selling products in the entire e.l.f. lineup, the Halo Glow Liquid Filter and the Power Grip Primer, those are both dupes for prestige items. And a really smart part about their dupe forward strategy is that, again, it leads to a lot of very organic conversation. You know, going back to this once again, people are going to be shouting from the rooftops when they find a dupe from their favorite high-end product. Imagine e.l.f. launched a brand new blush that's not intended to dupe anything. Sure, people would be talking about the product, reviewing it because it's e.l.f. and e.l.f. is a popular brand, but it would not get nearly the amount of attention that it would get if the product was clearly intended to dupe another popular blush on the market. Because when it's a dupe, everyone wants to create a video about it being a dupe. You know, there's almost that built-in virality there of, hey, I'm gonna make this video about a dupe. It's naturally gonna get more traction. But also people wanna see, how similar is it? Is it actually a dupe? Is it not? So again, them utilizing this dupe forward strategy further creates a lot of this organic conversation around the brand without them having to do a lot of paid media. And again, they're doing a lot of media, but in an untraditional way that we're going to get to. I know I keep saying that, but there's a lot here. But at the same time that dupes have been influential in e.l.f.'s growth, they have also had some controversy around these dupes. You know, people have pretty polarized opinions on duping products. I would say the public opinion on duping is seemingly more lenient today than it was a few years prior. People are more excited about dupes than they used to be. But what I will say, kind of anecdotally, what I've heard from my own audience and I've heard in conversations in the beauty space is that a lot of consumers feel bored and uninspired by dupes. They find them to be stale. But beyond any of that, e.l.f. is also running into a bit of legal trouble surrounding these dupes. They're currently in a legal battle with Benefit over their dupe of the roller lash. This launched in 2023. It is called the Lash and Roll. The packaging in particular, almost indistinguishable. I mean, not really, but like they're close. And for the most part, there's not much legal ground when it comes to dupes. That's why we've seen it done over and over again in beauty, in fashion, and beyond. You know, there's not a ton that can be done to prevent this. Most of it is legal, actually. But with this Benefit case that has been ongoing, Benefit is attempting to sue for trade dress infringement. Basically, the idea that the product looks so similar that it might confuse a consumer, saying blatant copying of the Benefit IP on its Lash and Roll mascara is likely to confuse or deceive customers into believing that both plaintiff and defendant's products are affiliated or originate from the same source. Lisa Miller wrote about this in the Columbia Journal of Law and Arts, saying whether or not e.l.f.'s product is infringing on Benefit's trademark is yet to be decided. And this decision could have major implications for the rest of the beauty industry. Dupes are common in the makeup industry, and the downfall of Lash and Roll mascara could take down this popular way of finding cheaper products. I don't anticipate that happening. I don't see much happening with this case. I certainly don't see it stopping brands from launching dupes. What I could see happening, that I suspect is kind of already happening, is brands opting for more covert packaging when it comes to their dupes. And part of the reason I see this is the mascara that launched after this from e.l.f. was also an intentional dupe. It is the e.l.f. Lash Extender, and it is clearly supposed to dupe the Thrive Extension Lash Mascara. And based on the timeline of when that product launched in 2024, we can assume that they were going through product development of that product right around the time that this case started with Benefit. So what you'll notice different between the two is that the Benefit packaging is almost identical for the e.l.f. dupe. But when it comes to the subsequent launch of the Lash Extender, they went for slightly more covert packaging. It does have that same green theme throughout, but it doesn't look identical, you know? Susan Scafidi, founder of Fashion Law Institute, says about this dupe lawsuit, it comes down to if the dupes are imitating the original product in such a way that consumers will be confused. If the consumer isn't confused about what they're getting, it's not actually illegal. So again, we're kind of seeing e.l.f. do this. The packaging of the dupe products definitely feels inspired by the original, but it's not as close as they've done in the past. So considering somewhat of a consumer fatigue that I'm hearing about, at least anecdotally, regarding dupes, it does make me question, what does the long-term strategy look like for e.l.f. when so much of their focus is on dupes? Well, it actually seems like e.l.f. is pretty proactively circumventing this through some of their non-beauty ventures, and some weird ones that you might not be aware of. So let's get into that. Okay, going back to that disruptive nature we've been talking about, this is kind of a key theme that's going to keep coming back throughout this story. But e.l.f. has proven to be pretty experimental when it comes to a lot of their collaborations and a lot of their efforts. We've seen this not only through some unexpected makeup collaborations. We watched them collaborate with Chipotle, Dunkin' Donuts, American Eagle, Tinder, most recently Stanley. I know that was a big partnership that e.l.f. did. We've seen them dipping their toes into a world outside of beauty. Even if it still has had that beauty component, it's a collaboration, but they're clearly playing around in a world outside of beauty as well. And when they're not collaborating with brands or IP, we've seen them do collaborations with influencers. One pretty controversial collaboration that they did was the wedding collab with very popular makeup TikToker Michaela Nogueira. This was in 2023. Michaela was getting married, and she did this entire series on her TikTok leading up to her wedding, testing out potential wedding day lip combos, trying out a bunch of different lip products to see which one she would wear on her big day. This ultimately led up to her e.l.f. collaboration on her custom wedding inspired lippies. And that's not necessarily where the controversy came into play, though, a little bit, because Michaela is a pretty polarizing creator, but there was a lot of speculation that e.l.f. sponsored her wedding, which I know left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. The reason that this was speculated was not only that collaboration, but there was a lot of e.l.f. branding at the wedding. They did this whole photo booth. They had her lip product there. It said e.l.f. on it. And so many big TikTok creators were at her wedding, posting about her wedding, using that lippy. It all felt a little bit fishy. She has since come out and said that that was not the case. e.l.f. did not sponsor her wedding. She just wanted to have that e.l.f. kind of photo booth there as something fun for her guests, and it was kind of all speculation. But I remember that whole thing being pretty controversial at the time, and consumers being a bit frustrated by it. But that's just one other example of e.l.f. doing a bit of everything. But another place e.l.f. is dipping their toes into is video games. Yes, video games. Now, this is one I'm not super familiar with. I had to look this up, but Roblox is an online gaming platform, and e.l.f. said that they found that 70% of their users are actually gamers, so they wanted to be where their customers are. So e.l.f. is now on Roblox. They have a branded experience on there, and it is the #1 branded experience on the platform. And what I think is interesting is who is on Roblox? Gen Alpha. Again, e.l.f. is focusing very strategically on Gen Alpha, Gen Z as well, but Gen Alpha big time. And beyond a lot of these collaborations and or branded experiences, we are seeing e.l.f. work towards becoming a full-fledged media company, which they have said is their long-term goal. And we've seen this in a lot of the original media that e.l.f. has created. Okay, so back in 2019, they had one of the top songs on TikTok, and this song actually also reached #4 in Spotify's global viral charts, led to over 7 billion views on TikTok, and you might be familiar with the song. It's called Eyes, Lips, Face. I don't think I can include the song here for copyright, but I'm sure you are familiar with it. I'm sure you remember the videos. The lyrics go, "Do that thing with your eyes," and then in the video people would like put their eye makeup on, and then they go, "Let me see them lips," and people put their lips on. Like people are getting ready to the song, and the song is like eyes, lips, face. Wait, trust me, you know the song. Anyways, that was an original song that e.l.f. commissioned. Actually, this did lead to some controversy. Kind of. It was like kind of a faux, made up, weird controversy. It didn't end up being anything. If you remember when there were a bunch of like cult allegations against e.l.f., that was kind of tied in with this song. So they worked on this with Movers and Shakers. It's a creative agency that then later on had allegations that the founders had connections to a cult, which was kind of misleading. They were actually just involved in a course that had connections to the cult. And then they came out and said, when the shocking and abusive behavior of some of NXIVM's leaders were revealed, we ceased our participation entirely. But that was not before it left a kind of a stain on e.l.f. I remember this being a big conversation in the beauty community at the time. There were a lot of rumors going around in connection to this, so that kind of tied back into this, because this is one thing that Movers and Shakers worked with e.l.f. on. In addition to the Dunkin' collab, in addition to the Chipotle collab, a lot of these major campaigns and very successful campaigns that e.l.f. has run in the last few years were in partnership with Movers and Shakers. But the Eyes, Lips, Face song was not the only venture that e.l.f. has had into music. They actually released an album very recently this year. Yes, they released an entire original album. They said they created it because they discovered that makeup users typically listen to makeup while they're getting ready, so they wanted to create an album for you to get ready to. Beyond music, they're dipping their toes into film. If you remember, they had their entire little Cosmetic Criminals mini spoof documentary that came out very early this year. Also debuted a documentary at the Tribeca Festival. We've also seen very high production value Super Bowl commercials. They have now done 2 Super Bowl commercials with major celebrities, including Jennifer Coolidge. They're also trying to get into sports. They've had a bunch of sports connections, including sponsoring the Indianapolis 500 this year. So they're doing a lot beyond beauty, and this is all actually part of their new entertainment arm, e.l.f. Made. Yes, they have a whole entertainment arm, and that is something they're working on in collaboration with Brooklyn-based ad agency Madewell. No. Every time I would read this, I want to read Madewell because it reminds me of like the clothing company, but it's Madewell. No E, no Made, Madewell. e.l.f.'s press release says it will lead e.l.f. Beauty's entertainment content encompassing music, movies, gaming, and sports. Okay? Again, we see it all come back together. The stuff they did with Roblox, the song from a few years ago. This has been their plan. Full-fledged media company, not just beauty. So needless to say, e.l.f. is growing. They're big these days. And remember earlier when I said you might be hearing me say e.l.f. Cosmetics, e.l.f. Beauty? Well, here's where that explanation comes into play. So e.l.f. Cosmetics is the makeup brand that you know. This is e.l.f. Cosmetics. e.l.f. Beauty is kind of like the parent company. They have a bunch of brands under them, including Naturium. You know Naturium? The skincare brand? Yes, they were acquired by e.l.f. Beauty. e.l.f. owns them. And what I thought was really interesting, and I'm going to be keeping an eye on, was one of the main reasons that the CEO, Trang Amin, mentioned that they decided to acquire Naturium was because Naturium has a 40% male audience. And this is something that e.l.f. is testing. Trang Amin also said in an interview that they were trying something at Target right now. They put an e.l.f. display in the men's section just to kind of see how it did, get some data on that, what shoppers would buy with these products in the men's department. So they did primers and skincare products there. And this is something e.l.f. seems to be focusing on for kind of future ventures, beauty specifically marketed towards men, okay? But beyond Naturium, going back to the brands under the e.l.f. Beauty umbrella, we also have Well People, probably familiar with that one, but also Alicia Keys' brand, Keys Soul Care, also owned by e.l.f. Beauty. And knowing all of this, a few years back, I might have told you that e.l.f. was on track to become the next big beauty conglomerate, the next big L'Oreal, Estee Lauder. And while on some level, sure, but it's pretty clear that that's not necessarily e.l.f.'s goal. They seem to be forging a different path when you consider all of their media endeavors. Even their website says, "We're a bold disruptor," again, disruptor, "with a kind heart. We're creating a different kind of beauty company." But the word beauty is crossed out. So it actually just reads as, "We're creating a different kind of company." So again, the fact that it said beauty and then is crossed out and that is included on the website signals to us that yes, originally they were very much a beauty brand, but that is not necessarily their long-term goal anymore. At least not the only part of it. Okay, but as an aside, this is something we are not just seeing with e.l.f. We are starting to see this a bit in the marketing world with companies focusing on original media, okay? Did you know Chick-fil-A is working on their own streaming service with original programming? So it's certainly not just e.l.f. moving this direction. And while growing into this ginormous powerhouse that owns beauty brands, has an entertainment arm, e.l.f. is still very aligned with their values. And they've been quite loud about corporate responsibility lately, and I want to dive into that a bit as well. So I want to talk about their most recent campaign, but before I do, I want to mention that I think the campaign and, both the campaign and how loud e.l.f. has been about this is pretty intentional, especially considering their audience. The audience they're trying to target is mostly Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And knowing that a lot of these shoppers place a high importance on social responsibility for the brands that they're consuming. And Forbes writes 82% of Gen Z are more likely to purchase from a brand that advocates for social equality. Brands that align themselves with charitable organizations or demonstrate a commitment to environmental sustainability also resonate with Gen Z, but the push for equality takes precedence over anything else. So I want you to remember that while I run through this campaign that they've been really pushing lately. So this campaign was done in collaboration with Madwell, the firm that we talked about earlier, and it is their Dupe That campaign.
There's been a lot of talk about duping lately, and we want to join that conversation. Dupe us!
This is clearly kind of in response to e.l.f. duping everything, but the campaign is e.l.f. telling other brands, we want you to dupe us and the things that we're doing. So they broadcasted this in the Oculus here in New York City across more than 280 feet and 22 LED screens with the words "dupe that." And there are really 5 pillars to this campaign that e.l.f. is telling other brands, you should dupe us in these 5 ways. The first one being democratizing access to the best of beauty with the ability to buy 5 e.l.f. lip oils for the price of one of its prestige competitors. So, they're basically telling other brands, we're making these products for such an affordable price, these high quality products that compete with prestige competitors. Why can't you do it too? Which on some level, I love and I admire. But when it comes to the dupe conversation, I think it gets oversimplified too often. And I think this is a case where it's not necessarily fair to say that hey, e.l.f. can make this product very affordably. Why can't these other brands? Because there's a lot of factors at play here, and one of the biggest ones is that e.l.f. was able to omit a very expensive part of the process. Doing that market research to figure out what customers want, what type of product, how to package it, X, Y, and Z. e.l.f. didn't really have to do. They just had to figure out how to copy that, how to make something similar to that. So naturally, e.l.f. can make it at a lower price. But again, I think there's a lot of nuance to the dupe conversation. So yeah, that's pillar number 1. Pillar number 2 is leading with a kind heart. Again, you hear them say that a lot, leading with a kind heart, and donating at least 2% of previous year profits to drive social change. So, corporate donations are certainly not new, and e.l.f. is certainly not the only brand doing this. A lot of times, corporate donations tend to be pretty opaque. We'll hear them saying, we donate, but you're like, how much? Where? So I wanted to see what e.l.f. had disclosed about this. So here are a few that they have listed. They say they donated $50,000 to the Humane Society, $50,000 to the ACLU, $50,000 to the Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders, $100,000 to whale and dolphin conservation, $10,000 to Black Girls Code, $10,000 to the Vote Latino Project, and 100% of profits from a limited edition product to the It Gets Better project. They also anytime an employee makes a charitable donation, e.l.f. matches it, and the CEO and his wife match it as well. So that pillar I really love. Again, e.l.f. is certainly not the only brand making corporate donations. They're also kind of incentivized to do this for tax purposes, but regardless, we love to see it. Okay, pillar number 3 is making every one of e.l.f.'s 500 plus employees an owner, granting more than $180 million in equity, excluding the executive team, since 2014. Love that as well. Pillar number 4, they say standing with every eye, lip, face, paw, and fin with our double cruelty-free certification from PETA and the Leaping Bunny program. Now this one I will say, as someone who exclusively purchases cruelty-free, the language here is a bit misleading and sounds more impressive than it is. Double cruelty-free certification, that's just a bunch of marketing mumbo jumbo that does not mean anything. They just sought out certifications from two cruelty-free organizations. But what I will say, most people in the cruelty-free community do not consider PETA a reliable source when it comes to a cruelty-free certification. Leaping Bunny, yes, but not PETA. So I think the language here, again, it sounds more impressive than it is. Like, we're double certified. That doesn't mean anything. They just have a cruelty-free certification the same way many other brands do. But anyways, the final point here is one that they have really been driving home, and that is about their board. They say changing the board game as the only US publicly traded company to have a corporate board of directors that is 78% women and 44% diverse. And e.l.f. has done quite a few campaigns highlighting this, okay? Including something they ran earlier this year called So Many Dicks. They did all these advertisements around Wall Street talking about how men named Richard, Rick, or Dick serving on public company boards outnumbered women and diverse groups. They say there are 2 times more men named Dick than Hispanic women, and Black and Asian women barely outnumbered men named Dick. There are 19 times more men named Dick than women of Middle Eastern descent, and only 3 Native American women serving on these boards. And this board diversity conversation has been really big for e.l.f. Not only did they talk about it in their Dupe That campaign, not only did they run the So Many Dicks campaign, they also collaborated with the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical University, an HBCU, to publish a report titled The Not So White Paper, documenting the positive role that board diversity plays in US publicly traded companies. Honestly, I love to see that. I love that from e.l.f., and I like that it was a big central focus in their Dupe That campaign. But I also think it's significant to consider that they threw all these wonderful things that e.l.f. is doing into this campaign about dupes. in response to some uproar and negative public opinion of e.l.f. duping products. And I know dupes are very polarizing, and while many people don't see anything wrong with them, you could certainly argue that there is an unethical nature to what is essentially just copying someone else's work. So I almost find some irony in this campaign really highlighting so many of the positive elements of e.l.f. Even though they're all wonderful things and certainly worthy of being talked about, but it's important to remember that companies show us these things in order to increase customer loyalty. They want us to believe that they're this beautiful, ethical company. And don't get me wrong, in so many ways, e.l.f. is, but I challenge you to be critical when companies present this information because a lot of it should just be the standard. But okay, on the topic of e.l.f.'s board, the next part I want to share is not to detract from that work, but I thought it was interesting when we're talking about e.l.f.'s board, something that I found that I wanted to share. Do you remember the college admissions scandal? You know, back in 2019, it was uncovered that a lot of wealthy families were cheating their kids into college by kind of paying their way in a lot of sneaky ways. Well, an e.l.f. board member at the time, Bill McGlashan, was actually arrested on federal charges in the college admissions scandal. You know, he's not on the board anymore, but he was arrested on charges that he agreed to pay $250,000 for a fake football profile to get his son into USC. He later served 3 months in prison for this and had a $250,000 fine, but aside from being a board member, who is Bill McGlashan? Well, do you remember earlier in the story when I said in 2014, TPG Growth acquired a majority stake in e.l.f.? Well, he was the founder of TPG Growth, which is an arm of TPG Capital, a gigantic private equity firm. I posted a video recently about the struggles that the drugstore is currently facing, and in that video I shared that prestige makeup is currently outpacing drugstore makeup in terms of growth. Coty in particular, parent company to drugstore brands like CoverGirl and Rimmel, has watched prestige sales rise and mass or drugstore sales decline. The beauty category is more competitive than ever right now, and a lot of these legacy brands and parent companies seem to be losing a bit of their footing. But not e.l.f. Their sales have surged from 100 million to 1.3 billion in the last decade. And I really think the difference between a brand that's doing okay and a brand that's doing great is making trends versus playing catch up to them. And e.l.f.'s willingness to be very experimental with a lot of their collaborations and different media endeavors has helped maintain their place as an industry leader. Tarang Amin said in an interview, "We're not afraid to fail. We're afraid to not try something." It's the opposite mentality of mitigating risk. And between that and their very successful duping strategy, it's pretty clear why e.l.f. is outperforming most of their competitors in the beauty space. But I hope you enjoyed this e.l.f. overview. I hope you found it interesting. The last one that I did was on Charlotte Tilbury, so I can leave that link down below. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.